Hello and welcome to this overview of the Augmentoolkit code base, which, kind of like the interface overview before it, is meant to explain what the major pieces are, explain how to use the major pieces, kind of the main flows that you'll be going through as you use the project. So this is sort of the video version of this documentation page, but it is also meant to give you an intuition about the whole thing. So not just the flows, but also stuff like um, the pipeline conventions, primer, project structure, especially. That's what we're going over today. So let's go over that. The first thing that I'll draw your attention to is the super config. This is where you'll be spending, not spending so much of your time, but it is very important for using Augmentoolkit with the command line interface. Um, superconfig.yaml chooses which pipelines to run and which settings to run them with. You enter, like the entry point for this whole thing with the CLI is the run augmentoolkit.py script. So you run augmentoolkit.py, and this reads from superconfig.yaml and chooses which pipelines to run using that. Um, Now, you might be wondering, what are path aliases? These are shorthand. They are aliases for paths. So see, for instance, factual data generation pipeline. Factual data gen pipeline stands for complete factual data set slash complete factual data set dot factual data gen full. Um, this is a path to a Python file, then dot, then the function within that file that we are running. Augmentoolkit pipelines are simply Python functions that follow a few conventions. And so we must, since a pipeline file may contain multiple functions, we have to specify which function we want to run in our path. Also note that you can change these aliases. So for instance, factual data gen pipeline has gen comp in it. Uh, and gen comp is generation slash core composition. So if you really wanted to resolve this path fully, it would look like this. Note that when you are specifying an alias as part of a larger path, use colon. Um, this is a little convention we have. So that's how the superconfig works. You point the node at the Python function that you want to run, and you point the config at the config file you want to run. Config files are YAML files. So for instance, here, start here, complete factual is pointing to external configs here. And so it's pointing to this file. And the way it works is that every key every key and value, these all passed in as keyword arguments. Um, and things are flattened. So like top level things like top level headings like model auto train, these are used for organization, but they are we only like the only things passed in as actual keyword arguments are the lowest level keys. So do not have duplication unless um, the things that unless you have keys under a like duplicate keys in underneath the headings that are not flattened. You can specify which headings you don't want to be flattened with the no flatten heading, which is a reserved keyword. And you can see, for instance, factionals of T, for instance, is a no flatten thing. And we use that to have multiple different options for prompt sets configured here. Um, Seeing as config files basically pass in arguments to Python functions, you can configure basically anything you want to here, so long as the underlying pipeline supports it. And of course, since you have the source code, you can make the underlying pipeline support anything. But common things that are consistent across pipelines are discussed at length in config common fields, this documentation page. Um, Basically, prompts, inputs, input directories, output directories, and the models you use. These are common features. Um, Pipelines will occasionally have big placeholders, which you need to fill in if they are present, because they Placeholders are only ever present where something absolutely has to be filled in, or else the entire script will break. Um, as it stands, because the convention that Augmentoolkit uses for placeholders is exclamation mark placeholder, and then closing exclamation marks. Since that's a convention, it actually breaks YAML syntax, so you won't be able to run any pipeline that has placeholders left in them. Attention is similar, except they're only ever in comments. They point out foot guns. So basically things that are valid, but if you're not aware of them, you might forget about them, and then they might shoot you in the foot, hence a foot gun. So for instance, use subset is a very common foot gun. If you are developing and testing the pipeline on, say, some small subset of the data to see if it works well on that data, then you'll want to have this on. So it's a valid setting and it's a good default. But if you go to do a production data generation run and you leave this on, that's a problem. So attention draws your attention to it. More prominent in the interface, but still useful to note that's what these mean. So that's kind of how the main flow works. You define the pipeline, the function that you're running with Node, and you define the keyword arguments passed to it using the config path. And so that's how you run a Augmentoolkit pipeline. The specific process, once you activate whatever virtual environment you have, if you've run this with the start script before, it will be in .vn. So you can do source.vn/bin/activate, and that'll activate your virtual environment. If you want to run Augmentoolkit once you have your super config set up, so again, this follows from what has been explained so far, but I'll state it directly. To run a specific pipeline, the steps you have to follow are point at the pipeline with the node, point at the config that you want, that you have put your settings into with this, and then inside the config, make certain that you filled in all the placeholders and all the settings are as you want it, and then you can run Augmentoolkit. How do you run Augmentoolkit? By activating a virtual environment, and then Python run Augmentoolkit, which is hopefully self-explanatory. That will then kick off a dataset generation run and whatever else the pipeline does for you in the CLI. So that's kind of the main process, the main flow. The CLI doesn't use any of the additional services or background processes like the API does, like the interface does. The interface comes bundled with a fast API in api.py, and it also starts up an Vite React app in ATK interface here. And it uses Huey, which is like a task queue, and it uses Redis/Valkey. So there's a lot of extra stuff that comes with the interface. The interface is usually recommended because it's easier to use, but also because when you're using the CLI, lots of things will be printed to the terminal. And as it happens, under certain circumstances, if you're printing a lot of stuff to the terminal, that can actually slow down or block execution of a program if you just leave it. And since Augmentoolkit is a program that you want to really run and then walk away for a while it finishes and does its job, the CLI can suffer from problems unless you do something like Python run Augmentoolkit, then pipe its outputs to a log file. So it'd be piping with this, and then I believe it's that for standard error as well. Look up piping and you'll find out all about it, like pipe. That's a completely different thing. I'm recording this late at night. Forgive my misterming. Anyway, look at redirecting the standard output and standard error, which is std out and std error. Look into redirecting those, and you can make the CLI work for you as reliably as the interface. But if you want to see what's going on as it runs, and also not have any of the freezing problems, use the interface, pretty reliable. Now, that's kind of the core process. You now know how to run pipelines to Augmentoolkit, you know how it's structured. With regards to the config files, I will go a bit into the project structure now because that's useful if you want to change things, which I encourage you to change things. Changing things is a great way to customize your AI further. Beyond just changing the input data, you can also change the pipelines themselves and the prompts. So pipelines are all in generation, this generation folder here, kind of split apart by purpose. So core components is stuff that they import from, not really stuff that's meant to be run by itself. Core composition, uh, pipelines of pipelines, complete factual data, for instance, runs a lot of different pipelines. Um, my syntax highlighting is taking a second. There we go. These are each pipelines that are from core pipelines. So runs a lot of different things. And core pipelines is a bunch of pipelines, each for a specific single task. Um, Example pipeline is just an example by itself. Utilities, we'll get to that in a second. So pipelines, again, are just Python functions. This is a standard async Python function. They can also be synchronous, but almost all of them are async. They follow some conventions, again, which are shown here, and they also have some common fields usually, but those are not required. They're simply Python functions that are run with arguments. If you side by side these, you will see that basically all of these like keyword arguments here have an equivalent in the config file because these are going to be passed into this if you run this with these arguments. As such, it's very easy to create new pipelines, and I encourage you to do so. There are also some good abstractions up here, but like pipeline step class, etc. But the important thing to note for structure here is that each pipeline will have its kind of main code. Sometimes there will be in a separate file, like what's a good example? Yeah, sometimes there will be in a separate file a bunch of helper functions, but for lots of them, all the code is in just one single file, and that file is co-located in the same folder as its config. Um, and if you look at the super config, you'll know that see that this is how this is connected. Every path alias, let's go to something that's not an example. Um, every real pipeline will have its config, its like canonical config template, as well as its main code file, pointed to by the superconfig under path aliases. This is important for the interface to know what is kind of the prime example of a good config of what the fields are, of what some good defaults for them are, what needs to be a placeholder. Um, if you've seen the interface kind of tour video, you'll know that you can duplicate a config template. The config file that is located in the same folder as the main code file of a pipeline, that config file is like going to be the template, and the interface knows which config files are associated with which pipelines by using the path aliases here. So for instance, recall multiple sources has its recall multi-source config, which is pointed to here. This is a template because this is kind of the prime example of a um, a config for this pipeline. You probably don't want to change this file unless you want to break compatibility with the interface or have all your templates be different, which is the second one's a very valid use case. If you want to be non-destructive, you can make a copy of this. And if you don't want to clutter your Git history if you're developing, it's in the Git ignore that anything with the prefix hidden will be ignored by Git. So version controlling is not a problem. So if I have a new config with all my API keys, hidden new config, and then I put all my API keys in here, a secret, um, then this, as you can see, it's grayed out. It will be ignored by Git. So that is that's how you should behave around these things. They are templates. You can copy them. You can change them to change the template, and you can hide them from your version control easily. The repo was meant to be a convenient development experience. I didn't just focus on the user experience for data generation. It's also meant to be nice to work with itself. Even details like you can just like run Augmentoolkit is very easily tabbable. You type run, hit tab, run underscore, uh, type run, hit tab. It will autocomplete. All the different start scripts for the different operating systems are also distinct. Everything's meant to be nice to develop with. Um, so that's kind of an overview of the pipeline code structure. We've covered the pipeline structure, we've covered the super config structure, the entry point and how it works. Some of the things and footguns they have to be aware of if you're maintaining API interface compatibility. Is there anything else? If you want to change the interface, it's an ATK interface, it's up here. You probably don't, so that's kind of mostly tangential information. Oh yes, abstractions and such are in the Augmentoolkit folder. So this is one area where I haven't standardized things as much as I like to. What's the difference between a thing that's imported from core components and a thing that is in Augmentoolkit generation functions? Since both are abstractions used by many pipelines. Well, the idea is that core components might be something that someone might theoretically add to as part of the community. And it might be maybe something specific for your pipeline that you might want to use in other pipelines, kind of like spare parts folder, whereas this is meant to be um, the kind of core abstractions of Augmentoolkit. Of course, that distinction has not been enforced as strictly as it should during development. So that's kind of the guideline there, but it's not quite that way yet. As a result, you'll see a bunch of abstractions here and a bunch of abstractions here, and there's not really too much of a difference in what they are. But things like the engine wrapper, which is used absolutely everywhere, things like the generation step class, which is not used really by any specific pipelines, but is used by things that are used in every pipeline, like the omnipresent pipeline step class, which you will often find yourself subclassing for specific behavior. If you're making your own pipelines, as I recommend you do, because it's fun and you can make AI that does anything. If you're making your own pipelines, the pipeline subclass will save you a lot of time. It handles so much common behavior, like resuming from previous runs, um, prompts, like storing prompts in the YAML files. Oh, right, prompts. I'll get to that in a moment. But this is a good abstraction, and it has many subclasses that you can also use and learn from. And most of them explain what they do. So that is kind of an overview of where the abstractions are. One last thing that I remembered as I was going over this. So there are two things really that we need to cover now. Those are prompts and the utility pipelines. So firstly, prompts. Prompts are kind of easy. They're meant to be easy. Prompts are stored in a prompt folder, which is also by convention stored in the same folder as your main code script and your config file. Prompts are YAML files. If they are chat prompts, if they are completion prompts, they are text files. Um, Text files, completion files, mostly deprecated because managing stop tokens is annoying. However, the option is available, and I intend to make that an option again at some point in the future because there are quite a few completion formatted stuff is underappreciated, but that's a topic for another day. The thing you need to know is that when you want to tweak the operation of a pipeline, the easiest way to do that is to modify the prompts, and the way you do that is by changing these YAML files. Just write text here. The YAML's done in a way that means that you can mostly ignore the syntax. Um, you have few shell example. If you want to control output formats, so when you're changing the prompts, be aware that the one thing kind of you have to really keep constant if you want to maintain compatibility with the base Augmentoolkit project and not cause errors for yourself is the output format. Um, so for instance, in generating a question, which a good example would be like here, there's a big section on the output format. And this is important because in the code, there is a regular expression that is extracting this. And if you decide, oh, I want a different output format that starts with this text, then you'll probably break the regex. So you can change the instructions, but unless you want to do some coding, probably keep the output formats the same. If you do want to do some coding, um, then that's actually pretty easy to change. Just go to wherever the prompts, the pipeline step for this that corresponds to this prompt is defined. So for instance, this is question generation, and find something like find the output processor. Uh, so like in a pipeline step, you'll see an output processor. This is the function whose job it is to take the raw output of the text that an LLM gives back when it sent this prompt, um, and it will produce some data that then the rest of the pipeline uses. Change that to match whatever, they change the regex or code used there to match whatever the new format you have in mind is, and then that will sort itself out. One last word on prompts. If you notice this like templating stuff here, yeah, just like Python format strings, templates are done with curly brackets, one pair of curly brackets. Um, if there is a key of that name in the dict that is passed as input to the pipeline step that is running with this prompt, then that value will be slotted in there. If there's no key of that name, then just that will just stay as bracket metadata close bracket. Um, so a silent failure if you're missing information, but that's really only if you're concerned with making your own pipelines, and there are help pages specifically in that. So I won't go too far into that for fear of bloating the runtime of the video, which is probably bloated already. I haven't been keeping track, but we'll see. So prompts, utility pipelines, right? Utility pipelines are, so remember when I was saying how Augmentoolkit pipelines can just be any random code because they are literally just functions with arguments. So literally just functions, um, functions with the arguments and config files. So they're easy to run functions. Um, and utility pipelines are kind of, they are pipelines that do not generate data, but are related to the operation of an augment toolkit in some way. So there are a handful of them. There is the LLM server and RAG server. The LLM server lets you point at a model that has finished training. That will, for instance, be in the models folder. Finished training, it may have been generated by the most common pipeline in Augment Toolkit, the most important one, which is the complete factual dataset pipeline. This pipeline will automatically train a model with its default settings. So once you train a model with this, you can go and chat with it using this utility pipeline, which is run in the exact same way. You go to superconfig, you point it at the, like for instance, the rag thing here. You point the node at the function, and you point the config at the config. This is just under the Augmentoolkit pipeline, except it won't go generating data. What this will do is it will run a LLM server at port 8003 on your computer, so that the interface can then let you chat with it. The LLM server does this same as the RAG server does this, except the RAG server will also take some of the questions generated by your execution of the Augmentoolkit pipeline, and it will make a RAG dataset out of that using a tried and true method, which turns out Augmentoolkit's also very good for making RAG datasets. You can get much better results with RAG if you don't embed chunks of text, but rather because when you're comparing a user's question against chunks of text, the different kind of formats and structures, it's not the best one-to-one comparison. If you make a bunch of questions from the text and then compare a user's question against a bunch of questions and then find the most similar question and then show the context that was used to make that question, then you get much better results. Augmentoolkit happens to make a great list of questions, so those can be used for RAG. This pipeline uses that automatically. Um, and in fact, this pipeline is already automatically run at the end of the complete factual data set pipeline. So you won't even need to kind of use this manually the first time. But on subsequent times, if you don't want to train a model but rather want to run one, then the utility pipelines are available for you to use. There's also one for Discord. So the instructions for this are on the config itself, and I'll probably expand the README with some stuff on it too. But what this does is it basically it lets a custom model that you've created power a Discord bot. So if you want to make a custom model available for your friends to chat with in your Discord server, then you can do that with the Discord pipeline. You'll have to run this. Future Evan coming in here because my past self was a bit tired and had a bit of a rambling explanation. What the Discord pipeline does, the Discord utility pipeline does, is it it serves as a middleman between a utility pipeline that is running an inference server for the custom model that you've trained and Discord. So basically, Discord will have like you will have signed up for a Discord bot there. You'll have added the bot's client ID and other information to your middleman Augmentoolkit Discord utility pipeline. And so when people message the bot, it will send it to the utility pipeline. The utility pipeline will send it to the inference server that you're running in another window. And then that server will send the request back, and then that middleman will send the response back to the actual bot, which will then message your friends back. So the Discord pipeline is a great way to share your creations with the world or with people that you know and care about. Um, it is it will be running on your own computer by default. But honestly, for most computers, inference is much, 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 much easier than training. So you probably shouldn't run into any performance issues there. And yeah, I think it's a pretty cool addition. So back to the thing that I recorded in one take, but just wanted to replace my bit of a rambling explanation with something that's possibly still a rambling explanation, but a bit less of an incoherent rambling explanation. So that's that, and back to the video. You point this at one of either the LLM server or the RAG server. This thing looks at port 8003, so you have to open up two terminal windows, run the LLM server in one of them, and then run the Discord inference thing in another, or run the LLM server, RAG server with the interface, and then run the Discord inference thing in another window. Because this pipeline needs one of these servers to be running in order to actually send requests, in order to actually forward messages from your friends to your custom model and then respond with that model's response back to your friends. But yeah, the instructions for this are on the config. This is forked basically from LLM code, which is another GitHub project, very similar in some ways. So you can see the instructions here, or I'll add some stuff, to the documentation. But yeah, so that is utility pipelines, including the RAG server, the other server. One sec, just quick thing. The distinction between this and this is a simple chat interface, chat server, and the reason why you want it is because it handles custom prompt formats nicely, and Augmentoolkit by default uses a custom prompt format, and it also handles the custom system prompt and stuff. It makes certain that everything is set up well and correctly for the default Augmentoolkit model, if you give it the right arguments here. So that's the use of this. This does not have any RAG or anything special in it. This does. They're kind of meant for letting you quickly use the things you make. So that's the distinction between them. In summary, in conclusion, as the models might say, to run Augmentoolkit models, super config, point at the pipeline, point at the settings. Um, the code is structured with pipeline code and configs and prompts in the same folder. Um, there are utility pipelines. Utility pipelines they do not generate data, but they do relate to the things made using the other pipelines. Abstractions are in generation functions and core components both. Documentation is in docs. And those are the key points. We covered them all, but those are the key important things. It's enough of me blabbering on. If you have any further questions, please go to the Discord. I will be answering stuff there forever and ever, and also posting about the cool additions being made to Augmentoolkit. If not just about facts, but also want stuff like maybe writing style, or stuff like, oh, you're interested in the GRPO beta right there. That will be expanded very soon. So good for questions, good for the future, and also a good place to post about the cool stuff you're building. I hope that you go over to the documentation page on pipeline conventions and primer and stuff and go build your own pipelines because I want to see what you'll add to this project. I love PRs. I love it when people fork things and make their own pipelines for their own purposes. There's never been a better time to do that because the abstraction is actually really good now and the core Augmentoolkit experience, like there's an interface, it works nicely. Um, the core Augmentoolkit pipeline works well as well, so it's a good reference. The code is cleaner. Great time to build your own pipelines. And so I hope to see you doing that as well. You can also post questions on the Discord, not Discord. You can do that too, but the GitHub issues page. Um, my voice is about dead, and I have used a lot of time. So I hope that this walkthrough tour showcase of all the different nooks and crannies of the project has been useful to you. And that's it for this video. Have a good one.